Welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest, and I live here in Austin, Texas. I've had the gift of recovery since December the 27th of 1972, and very, very grateful for that. We are in the process of beginning a new series, and this is the first. It's on the subject of Buddhism and the 12-step journey, and our guest to guide us is Kevin Griffin, who is the author of a book titled One Breath at a Time, Buddhism and the 12 Steps, if you're watching on YouTube.
Oh, you've got the original cover.
Yes. Is it worth a fortune now?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Good. I'll hang on to that then.
Sure.
In the show notes, I put a link to Kevin's book. I'm not sure which edition it'll be, but it'll get you there. And you'll find also a link to his website, and it's got a lot of upcoming events and his latest works. This book he wrote about, it was about 5 years ago, Kevin, was it?
I like that, Bill.
Was this about
It was published in 2004, so it's 21 years old.
20. Well, it has stood the test of time.
I hope so. People still buy it. People still tell me that it's helped them. So
yeah. So there we go.
I figure at some point it'll, expire, but so will I.
Won't we all? That's right.
Yes.
We might get into that. We did a single episode, I guess it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where I was doing a series on the different, some religious traditions and getting some experts who could speak to how they complement or work with the 12 steps. And Kevin was gracious enough to come and do a quickie on Buddhism. And so anyway, Kevin, let's just get started. In the preface to your book, you share that for yourself, the 12-step principles illuminate or complement, your own meditation practice. One does not replace the other. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Why is that helpful? I find people try oftentimes, I've seen this in Christian tradition, they come up with the 12 steps for Christians and off we go. And they bypass the 12-step world and kind of create their own. I rarely find it helpful.
I have seen people try to rewrite the steps into Buddhist language, and it becomes just torturous, trying to, adapt to people's ideas of what Buddhism is. And early on, actually, the first agent who looked at my book proposal said, and she was sober, said, my one piece of advice, don't change the steps. And I've stuck with that. I'd much rather do what I call commentary on the steps, because that's a Buddhist sort of idea that we take an existing text and then we do commentary on it. We don't change the existing text any more than you would. I think I refer to this maybe in that very place where I say, you don't go back and rewrite Shakespeare because it's hard to understand. You comment on it, you explain what it is, but you retain the original language and respect that.
Yeah, you're right. Many people thought I was going to write the steps from a Buddhist perspective, but then you make it very clear saying that that's not what you're out to do. And here's a nice quote. It says, I love the steps. I honor and respect them. That's why I'm writing a book about them. I'm trying to translate the steps and discover their relationship with Buddhism. I'm not trying to change them.
Yeah, and one of my sort of fundamental principles, and I think you'll recognize this idea, is that the spiritual journey is one thing, and that there are many different ways to characterize it. And through different traditions, we use different language, different imagery, different iconography.
Mm-hmm.
but we're still describing the same process. It can't, spiritual development can't be unique to individuals because it's happening internally to human beings. It's not happening to religions. It's just that's the framework that we use. So that takes me back to the Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which is
Sure.
one good framework for that idea. So what I have been long interested in is what are the underlying patterns that both these traditions are expressing in their own ways. What's the core? What's the foundational? What is this path? And I will say, even saying all that there are some who disagree with that. Certainly, there's a well-known Buddhist monk, Thanissaro Bhikkhu, better known as Tanjef, who rejects the idea that there's like a perennial philosophy, the Aldous Huxley term. And I'm not suggesting that there is no difference. I would agree with him on that. But I do think that, fundamentally what I'm trying to do is help people to work the steps and find a way to work the steps in a way that is compatible with their own belief system, and introduce them, if they need to be introduced, to a belief system that allows them to work the steps without a theistic framework, which is, the place where, as many people get stuck.
Right.
And personally, it wasn't a problem for me, oddly enough. I don't use the term atheist to describe myself. And the question of believing in God or not believing in God to me is irrelevant to to my journey.
The big book authors, they were kind of faced with that when they were writing the book. Do we make this a Christian thing? Do we make it more universal? And they tried to blend it in some ways, and I think did a fairly good job of it, enough to piss everybody off. I think that's
yeah. That's right.
Happy medium.
Well, certainly the We Agnostics chapter will piss off a lot of agnostics, no doubt.
Right.
With the implication, if you just keep trying, eventually you'll believe in God.
Right. Right. And it's become more of a problem over the years, hasn't it? I mean, I do better typically with alcoholics and addicts who tend more towards atheism or agnosticism than I do with highly religious people.
Why is that?
Well, because they think they have the answer. And God knows I don't. I'm still a searcher, but I found it helpful to have a tradition. And I think we're somewhat similar in this. After about 20 years in recovery, I was able to go back and re-examine my own faith tradition and utilize it, because I think a lot of people in 12-step try to make either their 12-step thing into a church, their fellowship into a church, or the opposite way. But they're two distinct communities and traditions. And to me, what I've seen of you is you go to one for one thing, you go to another for the other, and you find a balance with these two that are compatible for you in your own journey. And that's what I've tried to do in mine. I'm not out to convert anybody to one thing or another. I do find it helpful to look at the different faith traditions and find that each one has a lot to offer. People have been at it for a long, long time,
Yeah.
So you don't have to do this journey completely afresh, each person comes along. Yeah.
Right.
What makes Buddhism and the 12 steps so compatible? The Buddha said that the cause of suffering is desire, and the 12 steps try to heal people from desire gone mad, addiction. I like that.
Yeah. My starting point, anytime I'm trying to make this argument that there's a connection between the two. I mean, it's when you look at the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the way to the end of suffering, in the shorthand. The second of those says that the origin or the cause of suffering is our craving. And the Buddha, he fleshes that out. But at its heart, it's getting at the same issue as addiction. And it surprises me, frankly, that more Buddhist teachers don't see that and don't sort of bring that out, because I think it's really what the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha is speaking to. And then it's more than just a natural fit. It's almost a necessary fit. If you don't recognize the addictive nature of the human mind and body, frankly, then you're missing something really fundamental about the problem of being a human being. I don't know. I say stuff. Sometimes I listen to myself and I go, that was interesting. What did I just say? Or I've kind of encouraged teachers that weren't addicts to teach, to offer teachings on addiction. And they're, I don't really know anything about that. And I'm shocked. I'm like, how can you not know anything about addiction? You're a very attentive human being who's watched your mind a lot. If you don't see that your mind is an addiction-creating machine, then you're missing something that's just right in front of you. I mean, we're addicted to our thoughts, right?
Absolutely.
We're addicted to our feelings. We're addicted to pleasure. We're addicted to distraction. Just 100 things. We're addicted to self, to ego.
If you understand that more deeply, I think it really enriches the 12-step journey.
To me, this is like at the heart of what Bill Wilson's talking about, right? I mean, he says it in step 3 in the big book that, self-centeredness was the problem, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'm not good at quoting the big book, but I know it's right there. And talking about this, addiction to ego, and in fact, the 12th tradition. People often will seem sort of emphasize the 11th tradition that you shouldn't, reveal that you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in public. And I gave up on that a while back. I mean, I don't make a big thing about advertising it, but to me, what's really important is when it says anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions. So what is anonymity? Anonymity is giving up identity. It's giving up clinging to self, to uniqueness. To me, that's the 12-step teaching on not self. That's fundamental to Buddhist teachings, that ego is a creation. But more importantly, it's not so much like people get confused by that. But what's a more helpful thing is what Bill Wilson is saying, which is self-centeredness causes us suffering. Ego striving causes suffering. Everybody can recognize that. Anybody who looks at their own experience, their own emotional life, and notices their behavior and their thought patterns, how they behave in the world and what they're trying to do in order to be happy, they'll find themselves a lot of times caught up in this cycle of craving for ego to be satisfied. I mean, here I am, having my ego satisfied by having somebody invite me to be on a podcast. Feels great,
Now you have to perform, Kevin.
But when it's over, I have to go do the dishes and I'm taking the car into the shop, and I have to go on with life. And if I'm clinging to this, then it's like, how do I behave when I drop off the car, do you know who I am? I'm Kevin Griffin. Like, who cares? Nobody cares.
Right. I had some good teachers. Did you have some good teachers coming up in 12-step recovery in particular?
Oh, well, certainly, yes, absolutely. I mean,
Good.
My sponsor was really, really instrumental in the transformation. I had a home group in Venice Beach, California, which is where I got sober, that was, very compatible with my, background and my sort of cultural orientation.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of artsy and neurotic, and it was great.
These are our people,
right
Kevin. These are our people.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. No, I don't know that I would have made it in lightweight AA, let's say. I had some very good teachers who plumbed some of the depths, and they were able to impart some of that to me. It took me years to kind of figure out half about what they were talking about, but I knew they were onto it, and I knew they were real and legitimate, and were dealing with a lot more than just not drinking. Right. And I was smart enough to know not drinking is not going to be the solution to my problem. Not thinking is, that would be a hell of a lot more appealing.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the areas that particularly people outside the recovery world don't understand, that abstinence isn't the end game. No. That it's the beginning rather than the end. And it just allows for the process of recovery to begin.
Yeah, and it brings me to the next quote here you've got here. In 12-step parlance, we work the steps. There's effort involved, action. We're not just thinking about them or meditating on them. And the work of step one is quitting drinking or drugging, overeating, gambling, or whatever activity brought us to this point. We don't just admit we've got a problem. We do something about it. It's really the beginning of change. It's a life change. Yeah. Was for me.
In Buddhist terms, it's karma. Karma doesn't mean, in a past lifetime something happened and so now you're rich or you're poor or whatever. It means that every thought, every word, and every action has an impact in how your life will unfold. It doesn't determine how your life will unfold because there are many other factors than our personal karma, like, where you're born and your family and the society you live in and the time in history you live in and all that. Understanding that my thinking particularly has an impact on where my life goes is one of the really strong motivators for meditating and starting to investigate your mind. Because if you don't know what your mind is doing, if you don't see its habits, then you are doomed to continue to play out those habitual patterns. Because as the Buddha says in the Dhammapada, everything starts with the mind. Even though it's actually, this is a place where it conflicts with a traditional AA saying that says, you can't think your way out into right action. You have to act your way into right thinking. But from a Buddhist view, even those actions that you're taking are driven by, start with the mind, even though they won't start with a conscious thought, but they'll start with an intention, which is a mental factor. So I don't know if that's too technical, but
no.
But the point is that watching them, and this is, why teaching meditation is at the heart of what I do, because in order to really change, we have to see our minds clearly. We have to come to understand our minds, and then we have to be able to, have an intervention on our minds. moment by moment,
Yes.
And that's the work that Buddhism brings to the recovery world. The recovery world suggests this idea in the term inventory. And my view is that Buddhist mindfulness meditation is a kind of mental inventory. So it's just taking this concept of inventory from the steps once, a little bit further into this internal aspect of watching how the mind unfolds. And then we can do something about it. Then step 6 and 7, the change steps, I would call them, can be activated once you because you can't fix a problem you don't know what the problem is, right? So when you watch the mind and you see unwholesome and destructive habits of mind, then you can start to make different choices, not just in how you think, but how you behave and how you speak, because those are all interconnected, right? And that's how change really happens. And I think mindfulness meditation is so critical to a really, fulsome recovery.
I'm reminded of the 4 absolutes when you were speaking. I've done a lot of study on the history of AA, and for me, two-way prayer and the 4 absolutes were the things that got left behind. And whenever I bring up the 4 absolutes, people are okay with honesty, unselfishness, love. Those are okay, but purity, boy, they just want to run. When you messing with my sex life, no, I'm messing with your thought life. It's purity of mind, purity of heart, purity of the emotions, and then sexual purity as well. But it's watching for contamination slipping in.
Yeah.
And it daily, it slips in daily.
The Buddhist term that a lot of my teachers, particularly the monastics, use is wholesome and unwholesome. And it's got a little less of a sort of moralistic tone to it than purity.
Right. Yeah, I like that.
That might appeal to our secular Western world.
We're very touchy. We're very
touchy about morality. Oh God, that's for those crazy evangelicals.
Right. You talk about a moment of clarity, and I think it has some Buddhist implications. It also had some reality in your own life. You were practicing meditation and trying to drink and drug successfully, and you weren't doing so well, huh?
Well, it goes without saying.
It was a good try, Kevin.
Thanks.
I was trying to be a priest and drink, and, so I wasn't far behind you.
Yeah, I mean, it's that spiritual bypass, trying to use spirituality to solve real life problems, practical problems that are not. It's the wrong answer to the right question. I don't know about you, but from what you just said, I imagine that, like me, you were very selective in terms of how you sort of chose to practice your spirituality. I mean, I was very selective. It was like, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to go on retreats, but I'm not really going to pay attention to this whole morality, the precepts in Buddhism. I'm not going to really evolve as a human being. I'm not going to really live the principles that supposedly taking in, I'm just going to think that I can meditate, and as if that's some kind of a drug that will fix me, as if a drug could fix me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just very selective. It certainly didn't work. I don't know how much it laid the foundation for recovery, but it showed that there was a part of me that wanted a better life, that was willing to engage in a spiritual life, but just hadn't really found the combination of tools that I needed. And sobriety seemed, my drinking and drugging seemed like the least of my problems. And in some ways, they weren't the least of my problems, but they weren't my biggest problems. It's just that I couldn't solve the other problems until I stopped drinking and using. And that's one of the ways that I often will speak in it, like in a treatment center, when people, or in any setting where people are saying, I'm not sure if I'm an alcoholic or an addict or whatever term they're using. If I don't know if that's if I'm really that, because, people don't like to take on that identity. They feel shame, or they feel it's belittling in some way. And this is the way I come back to them. I say, it's not really important what you call yourself. That's when I bring out my own experience rather than putting it on them. And I say, when I was drinking and using, I had problems and I couldn't deal with them. When I stopped drinking and using, I still had problems, but I was able to deal with them and grow.
Was that your moment of clarity? Because you didn't wake up in jail.
No. Well, I woke up in jail a long time ago, but I think it was the moment when my friend Steve, who was this really good studio drummer, said to me, now I remember why I don't like playing in bars. I don't like, being around drunks. And I was standing there holding a Heineken. And, there was obviously a build up to that. My girlfriend had been saying I had a problem, and and my life was really, professionally as a musician, I was really hitting bottom. And when he said that, that's the moment that sticks in my mind, because that was my last drink. Something clicked inside? Yeah, and it's interesting because it was this guy that I respected.
That was important. Yeah,
and he wasn't pointing his finger.
Right.
He wasn't saying, I don't like being with you because you've got that beer in your hand.
Right.
He was talking about the atmosphere of this, bar. It was like, what team do I want to be on here?
Yeah.
Do I want to be on the team of these people in the bar or this guy that I really respect? And so, there had been an accumulation of things. I think the previous year I had met a guy who was sober, who was a musician, who was cool. And I thought sober people were annoying and boring and, uninteresting.
Yeah.
I thought it was lame. I thought, if you're not drinking and taking drugs, you're some kind of a Mormon or something, and I'm not going to join up with that, I'm going to have to button my shirt up to the top. And, it just, how it is. We have these projections. Other people are like, oh, it's a bunch of people in raincoats in the basement drinking weak coffee, in the basement of the church, whatever. Everybody has an image of an alcoholic, right? My grandfather was a terrible alcoholic who lost, the family fortune. But my mother, whether she was an alcoholic or not, she certainly was very conscious about drinking and very careful about her drinking, as was my father. When I knew him, when he was younger, I think he was worse. But my mother was a council on alcoholism, the American Council on.
Sure. Okay.
So my mother was a member of that,
okay.
and their office was at the end of the block on our street, and she would go to those things. So alcoholism was something that I knew about, from an early age. We had a family friend who was the only person he only drank Coca-Colas at the cocktail parties, and he, was sober back in the 50s and, knew Bill Wilson. And so that was all in the air around me. The term alcoholic was very familiar to me. And there was a lot in my family. It was like, oh, he's an alcoholic. Oh, he's an alcoholic, but I'm not an alcoholic,
No. In ours, the definition of an alcoholic was you can't hold down a job. If you can make it to work, God bless you.
Yeah, you bet. That makes sense. Sure.
Made sense to me. So I had to keep changing my jobs, but that's right. Another story.
Well, for me, it was the fact that I smoked marijuana and I wasn't drunk all the time meant that I wasn't an alcoholic. It didn't occur to me that
right.
I was addicted to marijuana. The fact that I smoked it every day and couldn't tolerate going a day without it did not mean anything to me.
That's a tricky one, isn't it, Kevin? The marijuana as an addiction. I mean, it's a lot of people are in denial on that.
Yeah, well, people are in denial about lots of things. But yes, marijuana, at least in my day, apparently now it's so strong, you can't say this, but in my day, it seemed relatively benign.
Yeah.
I certainly never had any concerns about driving when I was high.
Right.
I was like, fine, and, it just was part of my daily life, just my daily maintenance. But it was an addiction, very much an addiction. When in the few, that's for about 10 years that I smoked marijuana virtually every day. And there were 1 or 2 days when I ran out when I was just in a panic. So if that's not addiction, I don't know what is.
Right. I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but you say there are several Buddhist schools of practice, and yours is called Vipassana. I guess what is it?
Yeah, Vipassana is how we usually pronounce it.
Vipassana, or insight meditation.
Yeah.
All right. Talk to us a little bit about that, because it's different than some other schools that I'm familiar with.
As I mentioned, the book is pretty old, and I wouldn't actually put it that way anymore, because Vipassana and the word insight is a translation of the word Vipassana, which comes from the Pali language, Pali, the language that the earliest Buddhist scriptures were maintained in. It's not a school of Buddhism. That was kind of a misunderstanding. It's really a practice. It's a form of meditation that comes out of the Theravada school of Buddhism, means the way of the elders. If you want a brief overview, there are 3 major Buddhist traditions, and the easiest way to keep them separated in your mind is to think of them geographically. There's the Theravada, which is the oldest one, which is found in Burma, Thailand, Sri Lanka, as well as some other places, but those are the main places. And then there's Mahayana, which means the greater path. And that includes Zen Buddhism. So it's Japanese, Korean Zen, Chinese Chan, Pure Land, and a few other kind of schools. So there's these, Mahayana is sort of an umbrella for East Asian, Taiwan, the Buddhism in that part of the world, which came a few hundred years later than Theravada. And then finally, there's what's usually called Vajrayana, or basically Tibetan Buddhism, which is, the Himalayan plateau, and Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan. From even the little bit that people know about, for instance, Zen versus like the Dalai Lama, you like even in your visually that they're very different. Like kind of, Zen has a very Japanese kind of flavor to it of minimalism, and Tibetan Buddhism is almost the opposite, very colorful and loud in a way, So they're all different schools, and they all have different scriptures and suttas and sutras, but they all agree on the Four Noble Truths, on the teachings on suffering and the end of suffering.
Let's discuss hitting bottom. You've been practicing meditation for some time. You were still using drugs, and I guess we got into this already a little bit with the Heinekens, but something grabbed you. And that began the transformation. That began the change. In my own case, I got step 1, knowing that I can't drink successfully. I was just totally glued into, you can't pick up that drink. But the second thing I was glued into was, and you can't run. Because I had been really big on the geographical cure, and I went all around the world, changing jobs, changing people in my life. And I knew if I was ever going to get well, where I got to in my life, I was either going to go to Australia and just stay drunk for the rest of my life, or I was going to go to India, join an ashram, and get holy. Those were my 2 things, And it was like, wait a minute. That was my Heineken moment, And I heard a voice in my head that said, Bill, you're 27. If those are your choices, there's something wrong with you. It shook the hell out of me.
Mm.
I knew it wasn't me. I knew it. We were talking earlier about the ego. I know my ego voice. It wasn't my ego voice. It was another voice. Didn't hear it again for 20 years till I started studying about two-way prayer and got into some Jungian stuff. And Jung would say something quite similar, that there's a greater personality within us that has work for us to do in the world, needs to get our attention, you know? And that's the important thing, how it gets your attention. It's not, how terrible your bottom is. That almost means nothing.
No, it doesn't.
Nothing.
People, we see people who are just having devastating effects of addiction who don't get it. And then other people who just had one too many glasses of champagne and decide they need to stop.
That was it. It got their attention.
My process is very much developmental. When the switch turned, there was so much background to it already that it was almost effortless. It's very strange, because I started trying to, not unusual, I started to try to control and enjoy my drinking and drugging at the age of 22. And I was very much mimicking the way my parents drank, which was very carefully, right? Which is always a sign, right? And then there was, a sense for me of a spiritual search. And even as a musician, for me, that was an expression of a spiritual longing. So, I think I talk about this as there's kind of two lives being lived, that spiritual journey and then the self-indulgent, immature alcoholic addict journey.
Right.
It's kind of like back and forth between the two, and like a power struggle. And that eventually there was enough spiritual power to overcome that need to act addictively, because literally the day I woke up after that last Heineken, I woke up happy. And I didn't wake up going, I better get to an AA meeting because I'm going to drink if I don't.
Right.
I was like, oh, I'm not doing that anymore. I was done. It was, and many people tell that story, that they had that, whether it's from the moment of clarity. But it wasn't because that was not the worst bottom of my life.
Sure.
I had many, many much worse bottoms, including waking up in jail at 19 and spending time in a mental hospital and waking up almost, with scratches and scrapes over me from crawling home from the bar, and, all the things, that's just a few that come to mind immediately. But it was just, and this is, again, karma, this, through enough wholesome actions, thoughts, words, and deeds, there was enough to break through. And once I saw that, oh, okay. Now, that was, as you suggest, only the beginning, because by the end of that first year, in which I hung around the edges of AA, I did not, join, really. I just literally stood in the back and listened. I realized that I had a bigger problem, which was, as my sponsor once told me, your problem wasn't alcohol, it was women. Now, the problem was not women. The problem was my relationship and my neediness around women. And so that became the journey. I don't like the term sex addiction. It really wasn't sex addiction per se. It was, as I've dealt with people who have real sex addiction, I would say it was love addiction. And I can't say that I've solved that 100%, but I don't do harm around it anymore. But that was beginning to realize, oh, this whole thing is a lot more complicated than just not drinking. And as I said before, I couldn't start to deal with those problems until I got rid of the drugs and alcohol.
Right.
Without the clarity from that, there was no chance of real change.
Understood, understood. Tell us about the steps as sila.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So sila is the Buddhist word for morality or ethics.
Mm.
And strictly speaking, you would talk about the 5 precepts, which are very familiar, not to kill, not to steal, not to harm sexually, not to lie, hurt verbally, and not to use intoxicants. Those are the 5 lay precepts. The monastics take many more precepts, but those are the foundational precepts, which are very familiar. Other than the not using intoxicants, they're the same ones in Christian religions and Judaism, and in Islam, of course, they do have the 5th precept. So it's not about the rules, right? It's interesting. Another thing I like to bring up with people is how, again, the non-recovery world thinks that recovery is abstinence. But we know that when you get sober, you don't just stop drinking and using, you also stop lying, cheating, and stealing. That we realize that morality and ethics are foundational to recovery. Without that, we live in this, our mind is always disturbed, and because, we're either feeling guilty, afraid of getting caught, trying to avoid, trying to remember what the last lie we told was.
Yeah.
And we realize that, to live this life that we're trying to live, which is this really transparent life that's loving, that's compassionate, that's service oriented, again, that's recovery, right? Step 12, and the things that we're, practicing these principles in all our affairs, that we need to have sila. And in the Western Buddhist world, it's actually very underemphasized. In Asia, sila is, in the lay community in Asia, that's like everybody's, on board with that. They see that as Buddhist, but they don't meditate so much, the lay people in Asia. Whereas in the West, we decided meditating was Buddhism. So, but it's not. Without sila, you're not really practicing what the Buddha taught by any means. It becomes much more like using meditation as a drug or as a medicine. And so we have the mindfulness movement itself. The argument and the complaint about it that the greater Buddhist world has is that it leaves aside sila, it leaves aside morality and ethics, and that without those things, you're not going to really have the benefits that come from meditating.
People tend to skip over steps 6 and 7, and there's an awful lot that's contained within them. There's 2 paragraphs in the big book. Doesn't get nearly the attention and I think that's what you're talking about here. You gotta live the life.
Yep. So when I wrote One Breath at a Time, I didn't have a great understanding of 6 and 7, but in writing about them and then starting to really teach about the steps and, in an ongoing way, I came to see steps 6 and 7 as what I said a few moments ago, that they are the change steps.
Right.
That's where things start to really happen. But because they're put in such simplistic terms in the big book, we miss what I believe they're actually about, which is going back to my description of karma. They're about changing the way we think, the way we speak, and the way we act in order to change our life and to change ourselves. So meditating is a way of training our minds to be more present, to be more sensitive, compassionate, to be more wise. That takes training. Actually, as you probably know, the brain undergoes changes when you regularly practice meditation. And we see in the early Buddhist teachings, the Buddha repeatedly uses this word training. training thus, one breathes in. Training thus, one breathes out. Training thus, one calms the body. Training thus, one feels joy arising. So it's training. It's a practice that is training our minds to function in a different way. So to really change, it's not enough to just put down drugs and alcohol, right? We have to stop being an asshole. We have to stop being cruel. We have to stop being selfish. That's a struggle. Those are, we're very conditioned. By the time you get sober, you've got this fully formed personality that's got a lot of flaws, and it takes a lot of work, very intentional work, to bring those things into some sort of functional, wholesome way of being. That to me is 6 and 7.
Yeah.
It's not getting some, God to come in and, as I like to say, some kind of psychic surgery that removes my character defects from my brain,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's the deep change.
Yeah.
And a commitment to it, and then a lifelong practice of failure at it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, that's my friend who I think I quote in the book says, like, the key word that in the text is repeatedly.
Repeatedly.
Yeah.
Right. Siddhartha. Tell us about Siddhartha. Some listeners may not be too familiar with the Buddha. Who is this guy?
Yeah.
Where'd he come from?
Well, I mean, there's mythology, and what we are pretty sure about is that he's raised as we say a prince, but, and call his father a king, but kind of like being the king of Rhode Island or something. It wasn't really, a big country that he was in charge of.
I'd settle for that.
No offense to Rhode Island.
I mean, if you guys were thinking of me, I'll take it.
And probably not even that big. But anyway, this is in Northeast India, sometime around 500, before the Common Era, as we say. Mm-hmm. The non-Christians say BCE. And he's raised with a life of privilege, which is very familiar to modern Western, particularly American middle class and upper middle class folks. In his late 20s, at the age of 29, he just rejects it all. He realizes it's not the answer. How he was living, we don't really know the details, but there was a lot of privilege. And he was married and his first child had just been born, but it sounds like he had a lot of women over the years from some of the things that it says in the text. But anyway, there is this tradition still in India, but at that time, of wandering ascetics.
Mm-hmm, yes.
And he thought, well, I'm going to join them and I'll find the answer. And his question was, how do I end suffering? So he goes on this ascetic path, learns meditations, tries these ascetic practices. Nothing works. Nothing fixes him. And finally, he kind of gives up, but kind of surrenders, I would say. And he has, a breakthrough understanding, seeing how suffering is created. That's his first teaching, the Four Noble Truths, and seeing that it's about clinging. So that's why it's surrender, right? You have to let go. It's not that you have to get something in order to end suffering. It's that you have to let go of something. So he has that breakthrough at the age of 35. So it was a 6-year journey. And then he goes and starts to offer this teaching. And he lived to be 80 years old, apparently. So 45 years of wandering Northeast India, offering teachings and building a Sangha, a community of monks and lay people.
Why was it called the middle way?
One of his breakthroughs for him was realizing that the extreme of seeking pleasure as the ultimate answer did not work. Okay. And the extreme of seeking asceticism, where he was starving himself and living kind of like really, as ascetics do, limiting all forms of comfort or pleasure.
Right.
That didn't work either. That either of them was an extreme, which is very familiar to addicts too. Our
Oh,
addiction is very extreme, but and I really relate the asceticism to anorexics and people who who
right.
do harm to themselves as some kind of solution to their suffering.
You've got a long time in recovery. I've got a long time as well.
You've got a little bit more than me, about 13 years. I've only got 40.
I'm not going to lord it over you, but
yeah, well, I think you should.
Well, then I might.
I always call anybody who's got less time than me. I'm always like, oh, you're a newcomer, So
yeah, but there is a letting go that I think. I mean, if you can just stay with this thing. I remember in a moment of egotism, I guess it was, I was giving a talk in Louisiana. I was living over there at the time. And in a moment of self-righteousness, I stand up and I say, and half measures availed us nothing. And my sponsor was in the back of the room and he calls out, oh, bullshit. I've got 35 years on half measure. And he had me cold. He was, of course, right. And when you get along sobriety like we've got, you look back and you say, damn, there's been a lot of half measures here,
Yeah.
And it's paid off in the end.
Well, I put it in the context of right intention, which is one of the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. And that if I am guided by right intention, the way I think of it is that I keep falling off the path and I keep bringing myself back. And the key is the bringing yourself back.
That's right.
Just like in meditation. It's not that you sit down to meditate and your mind becomes like a crystal sharp, perfectly focused. You sit down and your mind drifts off and you bring it back. It drifts off, you bring it back. It's a continual process. And so it's, progress, not perfection is the phrase that comes to mind, rather than, as you said, like, half measures. I mean, it's pretty hard to do whole measures, and all measures are temporary. So,
Well, Kevin, this has been a wonderful beginning to the...
we got through the preface, maybe.
We covered quite a bit. I didn't get to all the stuff on my script, but I'll save some of those for next time. We're gonna start digging into steps 2 and 3, kind of put those together. You join them in the book. We will go from there. So, what are we going to talk about? A beginner's mind. Let's close with that because this you kind of close your chapter with that. Beginner's mind. You say it's important, and that there's some commonality in Buddhism with the beginner's mind, and in recovery in the 12-step journey, having the beginner's mind. If we can keep hold of that, we're on our way.
Yeah. Well, it's a phrase that comes from Suzuki Roshi, who was the Zen master who founded the San Francisco Zen Center, in his book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And he says something like, in the expert's mind, there are very few choices. But in the beginner's mind, there are many, choices. So it's a question of open-mindedness, really. Right? For example, the people who tend to buy my books are people who are new to recovery, who tend to be open to ideas. Old-timers, they don't want to hear it because they've already got it figured out.
Oh.
Right? They're not going out buying the latest book on recovery because they know all about it already. So that experts, once we become an expert, we can tend to stop learning.
It's dangerous.
Yeah. So it's really about being present and open-minded.
Tom Powers said something interesting. He said he helped Wilson write the 12 and 12 and AA Comes of Age and some of those things. He was a bit of an extremist in a good way. But he said, when the drunk stumbles into the AA meeting, we should sit at his feet. In the sense that he's got something to teach us old timers, What's it like out there,
Yeah. I mean, people often talk about that. The newcomer's the most important one in the meeting, and not just because we're trying to help them, but as you're saying, they're the reminder that if we, as I say, the ism is incredibly short memory, and
that's right.
Maybe it wasn't that bad,
Oh yeah, that's the madness. That's the madness that we all suffer.
That's the disease. Yeah.
If you don't understand that, you don't understand addiction.
No,
that's right. Going to creep in, and they taught me that. Watch for it. It's going to come.
Yes,
it's
they did teach me that too. Yep.
Yeah.
It's a really valuable lesson.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, my friend, this has been a wonderful session. First session, get us going. Again, I got Kevin's information in the show notes, and he did an in-depth series on this. This book went on for 7 generations, I think, and he recorded every one of them. And I'll try to put a link to that in the show notes. And,
it's just maybe my YouTube channel, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. It's been fun.
Okay, Bill, great speaking with you, and we'll talk again soon.
We will do it again next week. And thank you guys for listening. Hope it was helpful. You get into the lotus position, and off you go. So.
I can't do that anymore. I'm just
yeah. Okay, thanks.
It's the position of the mind that's important.
There you go. All right. Take care. Keep coming back. God bless.